Hello friends and vintage watch fans, this is Red Vitus and welcome to my channel. Today I'll be working on a Rockford Watch Company pocket watch that I purchased at auction, and I bought it as a non-working watch. The bow on the case is loose. Not sure what's going on there, but hopefully I can fix it. And otherwise it's a nice case. The enamel dial, which is a double sunk dial, is in excellent condition. First I'll test whether the hand setting works properly, and it looks fine. I prefer removing the hands with levers. The plastic film prevents the hands from being propelled away, and it also protects the dial. Now as I lift up this inner piece, we get our first look at the lovely two-tone finish. This is a full plate pocket watch, and if you've been to my channel, you'll know that this is my favorite style of watch to work on. The balance is a little stiff, but the staff seems good. And I'll remove both the case screws to separate the movement from the case. And the case that the watch is in is a two-piece case. These did a better job, I think, than the three-piece cases of keeping dust and debris out. Back when this was a new watch, at least in the United States, not every road was paved and asphalted and paved again, so it was a bit dirtier and dustier. And these cases did a good job of keeping the delicate instrument clean. So now I'm loosening the hairspring stud screw, and I prefer to separate the balance from the balance cock when I remove these. I have to clean the jewels, so I'm going to have to separate them eventually anyway, and I just think that it's easier to do it while it's all assembled. I won't be able to press that stud out because the hairspring and the balance arm are sitting right underneath. I'll have to work out a way to do that later. Next, I want to remove the balance cock, but there's nowhere to wedge a screwdriver to pry it off. But there is enough clearance for this old oiler, and I should be able to use that to pry off the balance cock. And I rest my finger on top without using any pressure, which is to prevent the balance bridge from any sudden motion. And I find just going slow and easy usually is the best course here. Okay, now that I have the balance cock separated from the movement, I can push out that stud, and now I've separated the two parts. So let's put that balance in a safe place. There's a small dust ring that I'll remove. These were common in 18 size watches of the era. Next, I'll remove the dial, and there are 3 screws on the side of the watch that need to be loosened, but I leave them in the watch when I'm done, since they're rather small and easy to misplace. Here what I'm doing is I'm prying up the dial, and as I lift it up, the seconds hand is also taken off and it's on top of the dial. And now I can begin disassembly of the pillar plate. So those who've seen my videos before will recognize the parts of a full plate movement. So I'll just go through and methodically remove them, paying special attention to the springs so that none of them go flying off. This is the setting lever screw and the setting lever. And this is the setting lever spring. Now I'll remove the yoke. And the yoke screw is often a left-handed screw, and in this case that's what it is, but that's not always the case. So there's a bit of old oil, maybe even some rust, and that's why some of these parts need a little persuading to come off. But I always handle the parts in the most delicate way I know how. So there's the yoke coming off, and a series of winding and setting gears underneath. So you may be unfamiliar with the Rockford Watch Company. It was founded in 1874, largely by former employees of the Cornell Watch Company. Some of their early railroad grade watches were highly jeweled for the era and are actually sought after by collectors today. But during the 1890s, they faced some financial difficulties, and around the turn of the century had an infusion of cash. However, it wasn't enough, and in 1915 it closed its doors permanently. Now this watch is a later watch, grade 925, from around 1908, a little bit before the company went out of business. Interestingly, its factory in Rockford, Illinois, is still standing. It's in extremis, but it's undergoing rehabilitation, so it may be given a second life someday soon. There I just removed the cannon pinion. I use a pin vise to loosen it up, then I finished it off with tweezers. Now this last part is the yoke spring, and I find that it's broken, so I'll have to look for a replacement, or if I can't find one, make one. Now turning to the other side of the watch and working on the barrel bridge. These plates look to be in near mint condition. I don't notice any scratches on them, and I don't want to be the first to make one. there's a little space where I can fit in a screwdriver and pry off the plates. That's the winding pinion. And here's the barrel. So let's open that up. So I pop off the lid. So we have a broken spring, not uncommon. A lot of very old oil. I'm going to carefully walk this spring out. I made a separate video on servicing this barrel. I was able to find a new replacement alloy mainspring for this watch. So if you're interested in that, you can visit my channel for the video. Now please, if you ever work with mainsprings, wear eye protection. That is your most valuable tool. So there you see the broken mainspring. Let's remove this train bridge and expose the gears. This is a rather large bridge, but only has 2 screws. Now as I lift off this bridge, you'll see the entire gear train, sans the barrel, are all remained in place. So we can now see the arrangement of all the different gears. So there's the escape wheel first. And that's the pallet fork. The 4th wheel, which holds the 2nd hand. The 3rd wheel. And the center wheel, which is the post for the minute hand, or holds the cannon pinion for the minute hand. Now we see that there's a pinion that came loose, but there's nothing wrong with that pinion. It was doing what it was supposed to do. That pinion is called a safety pinion, and it's threaded so that if the mainspring breaks, it disengages from the center wheel and protects the gear train from a sudden shock by the mainspring breaking, which was a common occurrence back then. So with the watch fully disassembled now, let's take a look at the inner side of this pillar plate. Now this is a different watch from the same era. And what I want to point out is that the top plate is supported by a column. You can see there. There's usually 3 or 4 columns on these old watches that hold up the top plate. And this is a bird's eye view of that watch, where you can see the 2 top plates. The larger of the 2 plates is the train bridge, which rests on columns or pillars and holds the jewels for the gear train. And then you have a barrel bridge as well, which rests on top of the other plate, and it can be removed and installed as well. And that's meant for servicing the barrel. And that's how I think the vast majority of these full plate, at least American-made watches, were constructed. Now here's the Rockford watch, and we're looking at the top plates. And it's constructed a little bit differently. It has a barrel bridge, which stands proud of the train bridge. But as I pull them apart, you'll see that it's not actually resting on top of the train bridge. Instead, it has a profile cut into it, and that profile is matched on the train bridge. That's a very nice detail. Now let's flip these bridges over. These plates have some weight to them. They were probably milled out of solid pieces of brass with the supports machined into them. Therefore, they don't rest on columns, and the pillar plate doesn't have pillars. Now let's begin the reassembly. And I'll start by installing the gear train. So this is known as the upside down method. So I'm actually putting the gears on the top plate. This is the pallet fork. Now here's the escape wheel next. Sorry about my head being in the way. And this is the fourth wheel. And now the third wheel. And lastly, here's the center wheel. So with all the gears and pallet fork in place, the next step is to connect the two plates and hold those gears into position. This is often the most difficult part of working on full plate watches. And the reason is there's 5 pivots now that have to find their matching jewels on the other plate all at the same time. And with the pallet fork installed, there's no way to rotate the wheels to verify that they're in the right place. So it basically has to be done by visual inspection. In other words, looking at the pivots as they go through the jewels. I've had my graphics department put together a split screen so that you can see that taking place a little easier. So now I'm holding the pillar plate on top, and the first gear I'm going to try and find is that center gear because its pivot sticks out the furthest. So now it's coming through that center jewel. And once that's through, I then look for the fourth wheel pivot. Okay, now that pivot is coming through, and that usually allows the pillar plate to rest down on top. Unfortunately, the third gear is not showing through its jewel, so I'm going to work on this a little bit more. I'll just lift it up to see what's going on. And I didn't work at it. It found the jewel on its own. Okay, now I have 2 gears left. I have the escapement. So I'll just fiddle around with those a little bit. And now it looks like those pivots are through. I'll illuminate this a little bit with my flashlight so you can see all the pivots. Okay, I can breathe a sigh of relief, but I'm not quite done. This next step is flipping the movement over. So I want to hold the two plates together, but I don't want to squeeze them together. Just maintain what I have and flipping them onto a movement holder to install the two bridge screws. Okay, now I can begin installing this winding pinion. It's actually two parts. It came off as one part. There's a bushing, which I'm oiling now. And this is the pinion. So now here's the barrel. And because the ratchet wheel is on the other side, and I haven't installed it yet, it just drops right in. I've already oiled the arbor on the other side. And next I'm going to oil the arbor on the top. After I put in the three screws, I'll have a fully assembled top plate and barrel bridge. The winding pinion shouldn't have any resistance at this point, and it looks good. Now I can flip the movement over, put it on my case cushion. And if you've seen my videos before, you know that how I install this yoke. I assemble all the gears, place a little bit of oil on them, and that holds the unit together. Then I just flip it over and drop it in. Now this is the yoke spring. I managed to find an old stock one. I could have made one. As always, when I install springs, the general method is to place the spring down without any tension, then loosely tighten the screw, move the spring into place, then fully tighten, and then I can test it. Now here's the setting lever again. I put a drop of oil. I don't think that's essential, but I like to do it. Okay, now I have the setting lever spring in place. It wasn't intuitive to me the best way to install this, but I sort of set it into place and then moved it into position. Now I place a little bit of grease on the yoke. That's where the two parts rub against one another. There's the ratchet wheel. And there's a little bit of a notch or a groove cut out into the side of the movement, and the end of the click has to be placed in there for it to fit. A little bit hard to see and hard to describe, but if you ever work on these, you'll understand. And lastly, there's a cover plate which contains the click spring and holds the ratchet wheel in place. One feature which you might notice, which I think again points to how well these movements were designed. There's a keyhole cutout on the right side of this movement right now, and that gives you access to the bottom balance jewel. Most full plate watches, at least the ones I've worked on, don't allow you to access that jewel. So again, that's a rather simple thing, but kind of an obvious thing. And you'd think more watch companies would have done that, but this is the first time I've seen it. So I put the cannon pinion in, and now I'm installing the last of the intermediate setting wheels. Here I'm testing that the setting mechanism is functioning properly. So I turned the crown in both directions, and everything looked fine. Now I'll check the winding, and I'll give it a couple winds. Then I'll turn the crown in reverse, and that ratchets the gears. And I'll give it a couple more winds. And now is when I find out if I've done everything correctly. Hopefully when I place the balance on the watch, it'll start ticking. Oh, the suspense. Okay, it is working. Not a whole lot of motion yet. So as I'm putting in the screw, I realize that that I missed something. So I'm a little bit forgetful, and I forgot to oil the escapement. And I believe that's why the balance motion is pretty weak right now. So often we prefer to oil the pallets before or during assembly. I just neglected to do that. So I'm going to show you now how I do that, and I'm going to have to show you a view from the side. So here you're looking at the escapement. On the left is you might see a small red stone, which is the pallets. There's two of those stones. Now I can place oil on the pallets, but it's kind of late for that. So what I prefer to do on these full plate watches is to actually place a drop of oil on the teeth of the escape wheel. And with this tiny oiler, although I've already oiled this, I place a drop of oil on the end of a tooth, and I'll usually put 2 or 3 drops, or one drop per tooth, but only on 2 or 3 of the teeth. And now you can see that the just by oiling that escapement, what a difference it made in the motion of the balance. Here it is in slow motion. And this is close to 270 degrees in amplitude, just visually looking at it, and that's only with about a half of a wind, or with the watch halfway wound, so that looks pretty good. I'm going to finish assembling the watch. I just installed the minute wheel and hour wheels. Now here's the dial, and I'll tighten the 3 dial screws. Now I can case the movement, placing it back into the ring and tightening the 2 case screws. So next come the hands, since it wouldn't be much of a watch without them. Now the hour hand, I just set on the dial and press it in, keeping or looking for that hand being parallel with the dial. And next is the minute hand, and that also has to be parallel, but spaced appropriately from the hour hand so that they don't touch each other. And I set the watch a little bit just to make sure there's proper clearance. Here's the second hand. So now I put the watch in the timer, and I'm going to time this watch. I had a request from one of my viewers to show the regulating of the watch. So as you can see, this watch is beating at about 24 seconds a day fast. So in order to regulate this watch, this has a ball regulator, and there's a screw which I can turn either clockwise or counterclockwise to adjust the rate. So in order to move that regulator towards the S for slow, I need to rotate this screw clockwise. So I'll give it about a full turn and check where it winds up. And I like the rate to be somewhere between 5 and 10 seconds per day fast. So I have a little bit more to go, but I think making small changes, making a few small changes is better than making a big change and going too far. So here's my second go at it. My head gets in the way a little bit, but if you look at the regulator arm, you might see, you might be able to see it moves. So back on the time grapher, and that's an acceptable rate to me. Let's check it in the vertical position with crown up, and we'll give it a few seconds just to stabilize. And at about 11 seconds a day fast, that's only maybe 3 seconds off of the horizontal position. So that's more than acceptable. Okay, so this watch is complete. It's running great. Let's take one last look at it. Now you may have noticed I did swap out the case. The original case had a loose bow, and I wasn't able to tighten it to my satisfaction. So while I don't mind some plating loss or tarnish, One thing I can't go with is a loose bow, something that risks the watch falling off the chain. But I did find a case that is as close as possible to the original case, and I think fits the watch well. Now, this was my first Rockford watch working on, and very impressed with this model. I think in terms of both design and build, it's really an outstanding watch. So with that, I'd like to thank you for visiting my channel. This is Red Vitus, and I hope to see you again.